Hi, good evening everyone, and good morning or afternoon to those of us who are joining online. A very warm welcome to all of you for today's discussion about one of our recent releases, Yashpal, on gender and revolutionary thought, edited by Simona Sani and Kama McLean. This book critically examines the life work of an incredibly dynamic and influential figure in the Hindi literary world. Writer, journalist, and revolutionary worker, Yashpal was an important member of the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, a radical political group involved in India's freedom struggle. Bringing together a number of distinguished contributors, this book offers a fresh look at Yashpal and at mid-20th century politics in India. In particular, it analyzes his preoccupation with questions of gender and sexuality, and how he connected this to questions of revolutionary and radical politics. This is a book packed with important questions about the Hindi literary sphere, as well as about the role of anti-establishment and left politics in India's history and its present. I'd now like to introduce our panelists, and if they could join us, that would be at the table, that would be. We have here with us today Mr. Apurvanand, who teaches Hindi literature at Delhi University and is a writer. He has published 2 books of essays in literary criticism and has worked on the development of Marxist aesthetics in Hindi literature. His articles and columns, often on themes of education, culture, communalism, and human rights, have appeared in several major news publications. Next, we have Mohinder Singh, who teaches political thought at the Center of Comparative Politics and Political Theory, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. His main field of research is political thought in modern India, and his recent work has looked at Hindi as the language of political discourse in the late 19th and early 20th century North India. Uma Chakravarti is a feminist historian who has taught at Miranda House, Delhi University. She has written widely on Buddhism, the 19th century, gender, caste, and labor, and has an ongoing interest in the history of marginalized groups. She has been associated with the women's movement and the movement for democratic rights since the 1980s and is also a documentary filmmaker. The volume editors of this book, Simona Sani and Kama McLean, are both part of today's proceedings. Simona Sani teaches literature at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Delhi, with a focus on Indian literature and literary feminist and political theory. She has authored The Modernity of Sanskrit and has translated Yashpal's Dada Comrade into English. Kama McLean teaches history at the South Asia Institute, University of Heidelberg. Her scholarship is deeply interdisciplinary and focuses on anti-colonialism in South Asia. She has authored Pilgrimage and Power, The Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, and A Revolutionary History of Interwar India, Violence, Image, Voice and Text. I now request Mr. Apurvanand to please release the first copy of the book that we have here. Yes. Sure, I'll just. All right. For those who have joined us through video, I hope that we're audible, and also just an announcement. Right. I'll now hand over to Mr. Apurvanand. Just a reminder to those who are joining by video, please do unmute when you speak, and in case you face any issues, do alert our team.
बहुत शुक्रिया। किताब अंग्रेजी में है लेकिन हिंदी के लेखक पर है, इसलिए हिंदी का फर्ज भी अदा करना ज़रूरी है। सबसे पहले तो बहुत मुबारकबाद सिमोना और कामा मैकलिन, इन दोनों को इस किताब के लिए यशपाल ऑन जेंडर एंड रिवॉल्यूशनरी थॉट। जब इस किताब की खबर मुझे मिली उसके बहुत पहले दादा कॉमरेड का जो तर्जुमा सिमोना ने किया था उसे पढ़ने का मौका मिला था, और तब मुझे लगा कि हिंदी की याददाश्त में यशपाल कहीं बहुत पीछे चले गए हैं और उनको फिर से ताज़ा करने की ज़रूरत है। दादा कॉमरेड पढ़ते हुए का तर्जुमा पढ़ते हुए मुझे ऐसा लगा, और इस किताब को और इस किताब के लेखों को पढ़ते हुए जिसमें ख़ास जोर जेंडर, सेक्सुअलिटी और इनकलाब के रिश्तों पर है। और जब मैं इन लेखों को पढ़ रहा था तब मुझे किशोरावस्था में यशपाल को पढ़ने की याद आई, जब एक तरह का झटका उन्होंने दिया था उस वक्त भी। ये मैं 70 और 80 के दशक की बात कर रहा हूँ, जब हिंदी गद्य में और ख़ासकर हिंदी कथा साहित्य में सेक्सुअलिटी के सवालों को इतनी बेबाकी से उठाया जाना, और ख़ासकर उस इनकलाबी रवायत के भीतर जो उस वक्त भी जब हम पढ़ रहे थे तो एक तरह की प्यूरिटन मानसिकता से ग्रस्त था। और हिंदी आलोचना में संजीव यहाँ बैठे हुए हैं और सिमोना और बाकी सारे लोग भी जानते हैं, हिंदी आलोचना में और उस आलोचना में भी जो प्रगतिशील और मार्क्सवादी आलोचना है, इसको लेकर बहुत दुविधा थी कि आखिर हम इस सवाल का करें क्या, जेंडर और सेक्सुअलिटी के सवाल का। और इस वजह से यशपाल के साथ जो रिश्ता बना हिंदी आलोचना का, वो भी बहुत सीधा रिश्ता नहीं था। तो हिंदी के जो कथा आलोचक हैं या दूसरे आलोचक हैं, उन्होंने यशपाल को बहुत ध्यान देने योग्य नहीं समझा। मेरी अभी भी समझ है कि हिंदी में विभाजन को लेकर जो उपन्यास लिखे गए हैं और 1947-48 की पृष्ठभूमि को लेकर, उनमें झूठा सच सबसे मुकम्मल उपन्यास है, और वह इसलिए, और वह तमस के मुकाबले भी बहुत मुकम्मल है, क्योंकि वो सिर्फ विभाजन को ध्यान में नहीं रखता है बल्कि उन बहुत सारे किरदारों को और उस पूरी जिंदगी को जो उसके बाद बन रही थी, और उसमें खासकर औरतों की जगह, वह पूरा तनाव झूठा सच में देखा जा सकता है, और उसके बाद उनके दूसरे उपन्यासों में और उनकी कहानियों में। मैं सिर्फ इतना कह के सिमोना और कामा से चाहूँगा कि वो पहले अपनी बात करें कि अलावा यशपाल के विषयों के जिन पर सबसे पहले ध्यान जाता है, यशपाल की भाषा की ताजगी हम जैसे पाठकों को खींचती थी। यानी उन्होंने प्रेमचंद के आसपास लिखना शुरू किया, ये कहना चाहिए, लेकिन उनका गद्य प्रेमचंद के गद्य से बिल्कुल अलग है और बाकी लेखों के गद्य से भी बिल्कुल अलग है। इतना फुर्तीला और इतना गतिशील गद्य हिंदी में बहुत कम लोगों ने लिखा है जो यशपाल ने लिखा है, और उस पर अभी कायदे से बात नहीं हुई है यशपाल के गद्य पर। तो यह किताब इस लिहाज से हम जैसे हिंदी के पाठकों के लिए भी बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है, क्योंकि यह गहराई से यशपाल की जिंदगी पर विचार करती है। अभी भी वो हिस्सा अनसुलझा है जो इनकलाबी लेखकों की जिंदगी को समझने का है, और उसमें अज्ञेय और यशपाल दो ऐसे चरित्र हैं जिनसे हम किस तरह का रिश्ता बनाएं, इस पर पर्याप्त काफी विचार नहीं हुआ है। और यशपाल और अज्ञेय में भी एक तरह का तनाव है, हालांकि दोनों एक ही संगठन के सदस्य रहे हैं। सिंहावलोकन, जिस पर इस किताब में लिखा गया है, सिंहावलोकन एक ऐसी किताब है जो हिंदुस्तान के क्रांतिकारी आंदोलन के बारे में समझ बनाने में हमारी बहुत मदद करती है, और यह समझाने में भी कि बावजूद उसके महत्व के क्यों क्रांतिकारी आंदोलन अंतिम रूप से निर्णायक नहीं हो सकता था, और क्या परेशानियां थी जो गोपनीय क्रांतिकारी आंदोलन की परेशानियां हो सकती हैं। उनको यशपाल ने बहुत ईमानदारी से सिंहावलोकन में बतलाया है। हालांकि जैसा मैंने कहा, सिंहावलोकन के बयान को लेकर काफी विवाद है और बहुत बहस है। तो ये किताब इस लिहाज से हम सबके लिए स्वागत योग्य है, और मैं चाहूंगा कि आप सब पढ़ें। और इसके मिलने के बाद मैंने फिर से यशपाल को पढ़ना शुरू किया। उनका जो मुझे लगा कि यह गद्य कितना पहले छूट गया, और रोजाना इससे किस तरह रिश्ता बनाने की जरूरत है। तो बहुत मुबारकबाद। और शिमोना, आप बात कहें और फिर कामा।
थैंक यू एवरीवन। आप सब लोगों को सुनाई दे रहा है जो हम यहाँ कह रहे हैं? हाँ, स्पष्ट है? ठीक है। हाँ, सुनाई दे रहा है। हाँ, ठीक है। तो पहले तो हमारी काफी स्टिफ कंपटीशन है। तो बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद कि आप लोग उस कक्ष में जाने के बजाय इस कक्ष में आ गए। And also, on this dreadful, the most ugly of ugly winter evenings in Delhi. So, thank you for coming. It's really lovely to see so many friends and contributors, colleagues, students here. I also really want to extend a very heartfelt thanks to all the members on the panel, Apurvanand, Uma, and Mohinder. For agreeing to be here to talk about their own. They all have a different kind of interest in Yashpal, and to bring some of their own interests here. I want to thank Orient Black Swan for seeing us through a long journey that traversed the very difficult years of the pandemic. Especially Nilanjana, Sana, and Prashant. I really want to thank Kama. I'm so sad she's not here. I think without her, so we both had again a very different interest in Yashpal. Kama is a historian, and she had been working on the interwar years and the place of revolutionary discourse. And I had been thinking about Yashpal from a literary angle. And so, we came together on this, but I think without Kama's steadfast support and her commitment to this volume, it would never have appeared. And then I really want to thank all the contributors, some of whom are online, some of whom are here in front of us. Anya Lumba is here. Nikhil Govind, I don't know if he was able to join. Ashley Cohen could not join. Zhao Ke Ren. Vasudha, Sanjeev is here. Mrityunjay is here. Gautam, Ritu Madan, Sivali Hukku, Virendra Ji, who's online, Richa Nagar, Diksha Nagar. Francesca Orsini, who was also supposed to be here, and thank you, Francesca, for joining online. Again, I really wish you could have been here. And of course, Anand, Yashpalji's son, who again played a very big role in helping us to bring this volume together. I also want to thank Shubham Solanki and Pratik Ali, who translated some of the pieces for us that were written in Hindi. Now, I just want to say a couple of things, and then really I want to hear what the panelists have to say, and I would like to also hear a bit from Kama. So the first thing I want to say is that, edited volumes have a kind of low rank in academia. They are not really considered to be as prestigious as monographs. And I often think that that is very sad, because it's really in this kind of collaborative work that something different happens, which is not only a kind of personal relationship to your object of study and your voice and so on. I just want to use that as a way to thank everybody who came together to work on this volume. Again, we all came to Yashpal through very different paths, but there were some shared concerns, and one of them was definitely what Apurvanand has already mentioned. I think an interesting jhutha sach was shared by many people. Then of course there was this interest in the way in which Yashpal brings together questions of revolution and sexuality in a difficult, complex, often vexed way. But there is still something very interesting and very challenging about that. It really does mark a break, again, as Apurvanand said, in Hindi prose writing. The last thing I want to say is that it has been a long time since we started working on this volume. We had a symposium at IIT Delhi in 2019, and after that we thought we should try and bring together these papers, and then there was the pandemic, and then, as it happens, papers took a long time to get finalized, editing. In some ways, to me, and I suspect for many of the contributors, it seems as though a long time has passed since we actually did this work, and the book seems a little distant to us. So I think one of the things I'm really looking forward to, and already I could see a glimmer of that when Apurvanand was speaking, is to now approach this work anew, through the eyes of the panelists, through your eyes, through your questions, your comments, and in that way, perhaps to renew our own engagement with Yashpal and with his work. So again, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Kama.
I just want a minute.
Yeah.
I think this is ridiculous that he's not standing over there, and he can't even come to the front. आइए जी. मतलब ठीक है, आप अपना कैमरा वगैरह कीजिए, पर जरा रास्ता तो छोड़ो ना लोगों के लिए. इधर से आओ, कहीं से भी आओ. Come on, come and sit. There are chairs over here.
Thank you so much.
More chairs.
There's more chairs.
There's no chairs here. Please come. Yeah, please. Sorry.
मैं ये कहने से थोड़ा संकोच कर रही थी, क्योंकि मुझे लगा शायद लोग अपना एग्जिट प्लान करने के लिए दरवाजे के निकट खड़े हैं.
कुछ लोग आने की कोशिश कर रहे थे, और पब्लिसिटी आपकी इतनी जोरदार है कि आपकी कैमरामैन ने सारा जगह बीच में मार रखा है. ठीक है, चलिए.
शुक्रिया सिमोना. कामा.
Good evening, everybody, and my apologies for not being with you all today. I would have loved to have come, but I'm in the middle of teaching semester, actually just started teaching semester, and it's just impossible to get away. It's wonderful to see so many friends in the audience and on the podium, and hello, and I think Simona's really encapsulated what there is to say, but let me just point out that I am not approaching Yashpal as a literary scholar, whereas this is something that Simona does just beautifully. Her introductory essay is just masterful. And we brought together this enormous and extremely diverse group of people, all who had something to say about Yashpal from different perspectives. My own perspective was that of a historian and of someone who had worked on the revolutionary Yashpal and who wanted to, and had read Simavalokan in translation, Meri Hindi itni achi nahi ki main itni aasan se Yashpal par sakti hu. But I had read the Corinne Friend translation, which came out in 1981, and found it extremely helpful. And when I did need it, I tried to read it in the Hindi for my book, but I wanted to, Yashpal was one of the first actually to put the revolutionary movement in his own words and tell the story from the revolutionary perspective as a survivor. And I wanted to understand Yashpal through the eyes of somebody else, as he had. I mean, it's a memoir. He's talked about his perspective, but I wanted to match his perspective up with the perspective that we get through a number of other sources from his colleagues, but also from British intelligence, as such as it was, and sometimes it wasn't very intelligent, so it was a misnomer. But I wanted to give a short, narrative of Yashpal's revolutionary career through that particular lens, and that was what my particular interest was. And Simona and I came together and did this conference in 2019, and we had after that a very long build-up. My own essay was written, I think, 5 years ago. It's literally been that long, so it's not the freshest interpretation, but I think it is something that I hope people find readable and interesting, and that give us a new perspective on some of these new revolutionary movements that is starting to come up. I'll just close by thanking Simona again for being such a wonderful collaborator, and also to Orient Black Swan and all of Friends Online and the co-authors in the book. But thank you very much.
शुक्रिया कामा और महिंदर.
Okay, I thank Simona and Kama for inviting me, and I told them at the time of invitation that I am more influenced by Yashpal than having an interest or active scholarly interest in Yashpal, and that influence was in the formative years from BA, MA days. So in that sense, if I think personal is also historical in some sense, and if that is so, what it means to read Yashpal in the 90s and how I remember that now. So I'll begin with that, and if personal is also historical, then I would like to begin by immediately connecting to Sanjeev Kumar's essay in this volume via the historical category of generation. Like Sanjeev, I also read Yashpal's novels and some of the stories first in early 90s, though in my case the first Yashpal novel I read was Deshdrohi, not Dada Kamred, as in Sanjeev's case. Around the same time, one also came across the debates and controversies in Hindi literary criticism around the depiction of women's sexuality in Yashpal's works. In this regard, I can identify with Sanjeev's critique of Ramvilas Sharma's critical evaluation of Yashpal on this question. On this question, Simona Sahni's take on this controversy is more balanced and nuanced, which I will discuss briefly in this presentation. Since reading and reception of works of literature themselves are subject to historical determinations, I am sure the reception of Yashpal's work for the generation of readers in early 90s must have been very different from either at the time of their publication or during the decades in between. With the collapse of communism in Soviet Union and the investment of hope in the communist political ideology, even for the believers, couldn't have been same as in the previous 7 or 8 decades. The political discourse of communism was at least subject to revision at that time. Then there were also conservative and authoritarian onslaughts of neoliberalism and communalism in India. On the more democratic side, there was also an upsurge of subaltern caste in politics through democratic means. On the gender question also, in the university campuses in Delhi, the autonomy of the gender question was articulated in the feminist framework among the student organizations affiliated with the communist parties. in a way seeking to go beyond the familiar communist deferral of the question of sexuality through hierarchization and prioritization of stages of freedom. The publication of this volume on Yashpal, edited by Simona Sahni and Kama MacLean, focusing on the theme of gender in revolutionary thought of one of the most influential Hindi progressive writers, is both refreshing and entirely welcome event. One could also remark here that this book is in a series of other similar publications in the last decade, critically reflecting on the progressive writers' works during the last decades of the anti-colonial struggle in India. Most of these works by, for example, by Ania Lumba, Nikhil Govind, Priyambada Gopal, Akshay Mukul, Kama MacLean, Simona Sahni's other writings on the revolutionary politics, they engage in the critical appreciation of progressive and revolutionary writers' works, but their critiques are also suffused with deep sympathy for their endeavors and even for their historical failures. The effort seems to be one where contemporary critics seek to pick up the thread and leave the historical limitations and blind spots behind. The different sections of this volume contain chapters that discuss the theme of gender and sexuality in the novels, short stories and essays by Yashpal, and in the journals run by Yashpal and Prakashwati Pal. There are also bonus chapters on Abhatrai of Lucknow, consisting of Yashpal, Bhagwati Charan Verma, and Amritlal Nagar by Diksha and Richa Nagar, and a chapter on the glimpses of Yashpal's work and domestic life by Anand. It also contains translation of Viveki Ray's critical essay on Meri Teri Uski Baat and Yashpal's response to it. In my presentation, I will try to discuss very briefly the main themes of the volume: gender and sexuality, political and sexual subjectivities, along three axes: the public-private domain, a distinction and its problems; second, the history of the social question in India; and third, the emphasis on the non-rational elements like passion, emotion, desire and affect, which is a distinct and shared feature of the contemporary critical reception of progressive and revolutionary literature, particularly in English. The rational element or the historical work of critical reason is not absent, far from it, but it makes its presence felt more indirectly or implicitly rather than taken up explicitly. I think the main theme of the volume and the axis I have outlined pervade through most of the essays explicitly or indirectly. I read all the chapters of the book carefully, but it is not possible to discuss the chapters individually. Given the constraints of time, I will mainly engage with the introductory essay by Simona Sahni called Political Passions and some other chapters. The public-private distinction as one of the major analytical tools in contemporary critical theory as deployed in different disciplines owes much to Hannah Arendt's original formulation of the private sphere as the realm of natural necessity and mere survival needs of life, while public sphere is conceptualized as one of politics, freedom and citizenship. In other words, a sphere of activities engaged with something more and more valuable than mere survival of life. An important feature of this rather rigid distinction, broadly marking the division between the natural and the political, is the need for activities in the private spheres to remain hidden or out of sight, often associated with emotions of love, but in the event of transgression also of disgust and shame. This distinction has been challenged and critiqued on several grounds, one of which, relevant for discussing this volume, is that this distinction itself is a ground for patriarchal gender politics that seeks to confine women within the private sphere of domesticity. This book and other recent books on revolutionary thought take this critique forward by taking up explicitly the intertwinement of the sexual and the political. Yet, as Simona writes in her introductory essay, human sexuality is not the same as animal sexuality. This point is made via a critique of tendencies appearing in Yashpal's work of rendering sexual desire as unproblematically natural, as natural urge or prakriti. The figure of animal or human close to animal condition keeps appearing in Yashpal's works and in other chapters of this volume too. For instance, when Chanda, a character in Deshdrohi, laments that animals don't feel dissatisfaction, she is articulating a newly acquired awareness of the condition of their domesticity as coming close to animal-like species condition. In this context, Sahni is underscoring the consciousness-raising critical work of modern education that destabilizes the established private-public distinction. Similarly, when Gita of Party Comrades describes Bavaria as animal-like, the distinction she is articulating is that of political education that differentiates her party comrades from Bavaria. In the introductory and other chapters of the book, the public-private distinction is destabilized and not altogether dissolved. On this point, overall, I think Simona Sahni chapter and the chapters by Anya Lumba, Ritu Madan and Nikhil Govind seem to underscore ambivalences and failures of Yashpal's representations. In Anya Lumba chapter titled Can a Woman be a Comrade? The focus is equally on Communist Party's hypocritical practices on women as political subjects. The ambivalence lies in the fact that on the one hand there emerges historically an unprecedented representation of spaces for the emergence of women as a political subject out of private sphere through a mix of work of books, readings and literature and of the erotic. His own literary representation, that is Yashpal's own literary representations of female characters, frequently lapse into patriarchal binaries of the feminine as the site of body and emotions and masculine as that of reason and intellectual deliberation. Thus, women characters are frequently reduced to choosers between the available political positions of their male suitors. Although the story of Gita and Bavaria in Party Comrade doesn't really fit this formulation neatly, as discussed in the fascinating chapter by Anya Lumba, I find Bavaria's character to be most fascinating in Yashpal's novels. So this can also be taken as a question. At this point, a brief mention could also be made of the figure of the revolutionary inherited from stalwart Bangla writers like Bankim and Sharat, discussed in great detail in Nikhil Govind's book Between Love and Freedom. In the works of Yashpal, particularly novels, the figure of the revolutionary finds himself, I'm deliberately not using herself, although there are revolutionary figures, women are revolutionary figures, but this particular issue is applicable more to the male revolutionary figures. So let me repeat this line. In the works of Yashpal, particularly novels, the figure of revolutionary finds himself in a paradoxical situation. On the one hand, the revolutionary imperative of questioning and challenging prevalent conservative social norms remains strong, but on the other hand, the equally revolutionary imperative of renunciation of everything private or selfish or anything associated with the bourgeois ideology of possessive individualism comes in conflict with the earlier imperative frequently in the narratives. In her fascinating discussion of Yashpal's failures, and it's a very sympathetic critique, Simona makes two very interesting points, and I'll just quote these two quotes from her essay. One is that I quote, such failures are also symptomatic of a waxing gap between ideology, political aspirations and theory on the one hand, and action, psychic attachment and aesthetic proclivities on the other hand. Now, my question here is, how do we understand these psychic attachments particularly, which keep on persisting despite rational efforts and all that. So is this unrepresentable element, or do you want to say something more to explain this to us? I can only make sense of this, but when it comes to talking about that, again, this is the question to me: to what extent, I mean, if you want to take it forward, or if you have thought about this again. Now, second quote from the same chapter is, and I quote, "Might it not be the case that this is precisely where we catch a glimpse of what is most historical about Yashpal's work?" And it's about failures. After all, what these novels constantly replay is nothing but the difficulty of translating political ideals and commitments into action, into practice. Now, another question that I have is that it seems that politics here is understood as a work of translation or putting into practice of what is already there. Right? Isn't that the problem? How much time I have? 5 minutes? 3 minutes? Okay. So let me come to the second part, the history of social question in India, and this is more familiar, and my question is also familiar, but I will raise it nevertheless. The history of social question in India, this axis is obviously in continuation with the earlier one of public-private division. There are overlaps. As we know, the history of the institution of modern family and the status of women is deeply imbricated with that of the social question, as articulated in the reformist and nationalist discourses since the 19th century. And Francesca Orsini's Hindi public sphere, there is a fascinating discussion of Samaj discourse in Hindi in one section of one chapter. So this is in Hindi, this is known as more like the issue of Samaj. As Mrinalini Sinha's work on refashioning Mother India shows, by the 20s, several women organizations in India, in the framework of liberal feminism, were able to overcome both the conservative and colonial resistance to organize political opinion in favor of progressive reforms. In this liberal feminist articulation, not just women's independent agency in politics was successfully demonstrated. Sinha argues that women also emerged as a prototype, or the figure of women was represented as a prototype of identity-free universal citizenship within the nation state. Further, the social question as women question was also articulated as a space of cultural authenticity, not just in conservative Hindu nationalist imagination, but also in the reformist discourse of Arya Samaj. Another challenge to the Hindu nationalist framing of the social question as family question came in the 20s and 30s from Ambedkar, who powerfully critiqued the exclusion of caste from the social question or its reduction to the family question in the mainstream nationalist discourse. Now, this is the general historical backdrop of the progressive and revolutionary articulation of the social question in their own works. In this context, Yashpal's Arya Samaj background and schooling becomes interesting and worth exploring further. Writing about this issue, Sahni remarks that given their debt to Marxism, the revolutionaries were not intent on proving their nativist credentials. Right? I'll come back to this issue after discussion of 2 more essays.
1 minute.
Okay. I think 2 chapters by Nikhil Govind and Ashley Cohen are interesting for thinking further about the issue of culture and caste in Yashpal's work. So now, still remaining, so the question now is Yashpal still remaining trapped in the nationalist cultural authenticity trap inherited from Arya Samaj? The writing of Divya, for example. So how do they deal with this? Why ancient? This fascination with ancient, and why not medieval? And what was the status of medieval in Hindi at that time? Nikhil Govind also points out that figure of Charvak as the cosmopolitan. Now Nikhil Govind points out several blind spots about the stereotypical representation of Shudras and other subalterns in Divya, Ashley Cohen's chapter is about Yashpal's interaction with the Buddhists in Lucknow with Badant Anand, Kaushalyan and Bodhanand. And there, of course, he quotes from one of Kaushalyan's writings on Yashpal, one essay on Yashpal, where he says that, I am very much kind of hit by his articulation of the women's plight in Divya, and even the rejection from, expulsion from the Buddhist Vihara. So my question is, and unlike Yashpal, Kaushalyan was actively involved with Arya Samaj. Right? Now, while the Buddhist Kaushalyan is willing to identify a blind spot of gender in Buddhist political discourse, was a contemporary communist intellectual willing to identify his caste blind spot in the Marxist discourse of the time? One more question related to the last section, which I will not discuss. Just one question. Is it possible to make a distinction between love and friendship in Yashpal's work? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Shukriya. Uma Chakravarti.
I'm actually in this discussion on false premises, I think, Simona, because I neither contributed nor am I someone who's well up on Hindi literature. And I know Yashpal only through the long series of interviews that I did with Durga Bhabi. So in a sense, the character, whatever I know is refracted through the persona of Durga Bhabi, which is extraordinary. And it's also interesting to me that nothing in what has been written suggests that there is a figure, there's a place for a figure like Durga Bhabi in the fiction that's been written, in whatever Yashpal has written. Now, I'm wondering whether this is a consequence of the tensions that existed between Yashpal and all the revolutionaries of the Hindustan HSRA, because there was, this question, a small select organization which is actually carrying out secret, attacks on identified issues or identified locations is perhaps generates its own anxiety as far as who can be trusted, who can't be trusted. And at the end of the day, questions of the trust of the writings and in fiction or in whatever form is actually a takeoff from the totality of the persona, Yashpal, who may have shared some things as far as the revolution is concerned, but there's also a way in which I think he brings other things. It seems to me I did read the book carefully and I liked some parts of it very much. I particularly like the bits which are on Buddhism because I relate to that, having worked on Buddhism myself. And the question of the Charavaks and so on was interesting, seems to me. But as you rightly point out, that there is something here about going back to an ancient past. And I'm not sure it is only coming out of the inability to think about the medieval. And perhaps it is something to do with the way in which nationalism also cast itself as having to go back to roots which they seemed to see as very, very early. And whether you're Marxist or whether you're not, you would end up discussing certain things more than you would perhaps, later histories like an unfolding in a certain kind of way. And the Arya Samaj will also push you in that direction because the Arya Samaj, after all, is recovering that. Now, I'm struck by, and whatever I'm going to say to you is very tangential in that sense of term, because it's not coming out of the book, which I enjoyed. As I said, some Some of the essays are really very, very interesting. But to me, the real life characters, and as a historian, actually, obviously, what appeals to me is the real. You may turn around and say there's nothing real in history and it's all fictitious and everything is like, subjective when you go off and analyze it and whatever it is. But there are the texts or characters, or in this case, the generation of the oral narratives that we had. Now, one discovered, and by the way, I was introduced to Hindi literature through a friend, and so I've read, my Hindi is very, I read very slowly, but I have read Agyer, for instance, and I've read a few other, and I've read a lot of Premchand. But the fact is that the power of history quite overwhelms the power of fiction as far as I'm concerned. Okay? So that's my problem. Huh? So at the end of the day, nothing that you will write as fiction is going to cut any ice with me. तुम कहते रहो, तुम ये भी कर दो, वो भी कर दो, नाटक कर लो, सब कुछ कर लो. It doesn't have the grip that history has. So the historical,
Kama wins.
That history has, absolutely. So even Kama, even Kama, I warm to her because she does that extraordinary book. I got to know her only, and she got to know me only because I responded to that book of hers, where she describes the episode in which the what's it called, the killing has happened, and they have to now escape. And so the whole persona change that Bhagat Singh has of going from Sardar to English toady-looking character is actually the point of the poster itself is a creation of that moment after Saunders' assassination. Now, this is the heart of how we think of, or how people have remembered through whatever bits of writing, how Durga Bhabhi herself has gone down in history. Okay? And it's an extraordinary thing because this fictionalization and this desperate desire to kahin na kahin usme romance dal dein is so terrible and so obsessive that I have had even Kuldeep Nayyar trying to give me a story of, trying to look at romance in Durga Bhabhi's their escape episode. Like they have to create a romantic connection between Bhagat Singh and Durga Bhabhi, and it's a travesty. It's ridiculous. Why are you bloody hell so obsessed? You are obsessed with romance. You guys are obsessed with sexuality. I mean, it's not that everybody lives like that, damn it, So it seems to me it's really reducing the drama of real life, the passion of the movement, the passion of jumping into something. And poor Durga Bhabhi will disappear completely in that nonsense. Okay? So now, ittifaq se we discover through this Hindi knowing friend of mine who introduced me to Agyer, that Durga Bhabhi was living in Ghaziabad, and she had met her, and she was. You don't know? You guys don't know who Durga Bhabhi is? Okay, Durga, you don't know? Okay, Bhagwati Charan Verma was a Vora. Sorry, Vora. Durga Vora. Durga Bhabhi is the wife of Bhagwati Charan Vora, who is a member of the Hindustan Socialist Republican Army. And these are characters. I don't know whether Yashpal was in or was he not. I'm not absolutely sure, because Yashpal occupies in the real account. There is a kind of tense relationship between the revolutionaries and Yashpal, as far as I can make out. Even in he was. He may have been. But even Bhagwati Charan Vora had a complex location within that, because nobody trusts anybody else. Damn it, you don't understand party. Party का मतलब क्या है? कौन किसका actual दोस्त है? कौन असल है? कौन fake है? Is a running anxiety as far as party structures are concerned, and we have inherited that from the days of Bankim Chandra. I mean, if you go back to Anand Math, see, the revolutionary is a character that is emerging in history for the first time through these writings, through these accounts that were written up at that point of time, and the narrative is peculiarly tense. So much written on the love over here is actually, that's the thing that you have to throw out. You're not supposed to, it's not an issue that you can actually confront in the revolutionary party, in the revolutionary group, and the women are always coming and disrupting that. If they come, they will disrupt it, because they are nothing but sexuality. They are nothing but temptresses. So at the end of the day, you have no other way in which you can acknowledge a real comrade as a woman. Now, Durga Bhabhi, so ittifaq se, I get to know that she's around and she's willing to chat. She's happy to. And so we did a series of interviews with her, recorded and transcribed. Now, she's an extremely interesting character, because while she was in the thick of the action, she's a minimalist recorder, minimalist speaker. Few words, very what would you call it? Meaningful, tight. There was no loose conversation that she's making. So take this episode. I don't have the time to fill out Durga Bhabhi for you, but let me take the episode of the so-called the occasion in which everyone sees romance and everyone sees a way in which Durga Bhabhi is playing her role in history, because she makes possible the escape of Bhagat Singh. So now this question, कि हमारे questions कैसे होंगे? So we are also asking stupid questions. So we say, so भाभी क्या आपने क्या पहना हुआ है? होगा कोई साड़ी वाड़ी? That's the style in which he's speaking. होगा कोई साड़ी वाड़ी and whatever. But the critical issue that she was dealing with was कि what is this great excitement कि मैंने उनको इसकी escape करवाई या मैंने भगाया. She says, so then she turns, मर्द भगाते रहते हैं, मैंने भी भगा लिया. It's a complete drama, because she doesn't know anything about that event. She doesn't know. They have come and said to her, chalo, we have to get ready, and they're putting on this nautanki for the escape. So she is dressed, and she's dressed. Why does he cut off his hair and look like her? He's got to pass off as someone who's like the normative Angrezi toady. That's what he's trying to appear to be. She is dressed suitably, so in a nice sari and lipstick with lagaya, and then they have her child as the fake possibility of it. Now, nothing over there is actually saying that this is husband, wife, and child. It could very well be, as she said, कि हो भी सकता है कि भाई बहन और बच्चा, बहन का बच्चा. But it has been fixed in history as this event in which there is this possible, what is it called? Conjugality that is fixed over there. And then there is a possibility of interweaving it with all this stuff about the undercurrents of the possible romance and what have you. And it's the most important event in history as it's gone down is not the most important event as far as she's concerned. How is any man going to get that properly? As I see it, if you don't even talk to her, if you don't actually engage with her, you will fictionalize her and create a certain kind of aura around her. In reality, she says, this is not the most difficult thing I did. You know what, I smuggled Mauser pistols. Now, you must remember that the pistols have to come from Germany, because ये अंग्रेज हैं. हम तो अंग्रेज के against हैं. So we are actually getting our arms secretly from the Germans. The Germans are the natural enemies of the British. So the Mauser pistols are coming, and they're coming via conduit in which it goes first to some priest in the Jaipur Maharaja's court. वहाँ से वो अपने घाघरे में, she's wearing the घाघरा of the Rajasthani घाघरा with folds and folds and folds, उसमें वो Mauser के pistols को smuggle करके ला रही है to Punjab so that they can be further, whatever it is. Okay, so this action and these really, she said that was tough. And then on one time she has to travel all the way to northwest front of provinces to fill shells with the gunpowder that is going to be required to blow it up. And she gets into a tonga. They are empty shells that she's taking from here. They clatter on the road and whatever it is that she's to pick them up and take them. Then she's put in a khema over there, in a camp over there. And that's the night that is the most frightening night of her life, because she's in the Pathans have been very proper. They've placed her in some place safely where she doesn't have to feel that she's being threatened by any men around her. And she is there and she's all by herself, and she sees that as the scariest part of the adventures that she has followed. But leave that. So at the end of the day, when you actually talk to a revolutionary, you will find that it's a mix of what would you call it? The everyday and the extraordinary, in a way in which you can't reduce it to the tropes which fiction seems to feel is necessary. And in the end, I don't want to be cut off in the middle of what I'm saying, because that's happened to me once before, and it was very upsetting. So I want to actually lead it in the so ultimately, what is the difficulty that she actually, what is the life that she has to, what are the things that she does on her own, relationship with Bhagat Singh, which is most interesting because it's a ribbing relationship that they have. She herself is, they're all very influenced by Sachindranath Sanyal's Bandi Jeevan. That's the book, that's like a Bible as far as they are concerned. They all read it, and that's what they, and even the child is named Sachi, because of this Sachindranath Sanyal. Issues like, everyday issues like how you communicate in jail is tidbits that came out. This is most fascinating. Okay, how do you send messages to them? Kapde unko bhejne hote. You give them clothes. So you udhero the hem, take it out completely, fill in the little chips, seal them back, stitch it back, and you give the clothes, and the messages are going. Okay, so this is how they are communicating with people inside the jail. That Bhagat Singh is teasing her and saying, "You think I'm very deprived, very unhappy over here. This is where they get doodh. So they collect doodh over a period of time, and he makes peda. And so he's feeding her pedas when she comes to visit. वो पेड़ा भी उसको खिला देता है. So this is the hero is also the everyday. The hero is actually the vague younger brother kind of relationship that he has with Bhabhi. There was one last thing that I want to say, which is see, it's and Bhagwati Charan Vora had a controversial image. They were never sure, because he was the funder, he was the rich man. Uske paas paise the. They were never sure about his loyalty completely, and there was always this, everyone is suspicious of everyone else, because they're all, they're living under this terrible times. So this is the scenario. But then when Bhagat Singh is in jail, there is also a mad escapade in which they think that they can release him by using bombs he's taken to court in a vehicle. They are taken to court in a vehicle, and they want to execute a dhawa in which they are going to throw a bomb on the vehicle, and then somehow manage to kidnap or take away Bhagat Singh from there. That escapade turns out to be terrible, a disaster, because the bomb goes off while they're testing it. They're on the banks of the Ravi, and Bhagwati Charan Vora gets killed in that bomb experiment. At the same time, this is summer. They go back to cut to the house. There are bombs inside a cupboard. They start to explode because it's so hot, whatever it is. And there is poor Durga Bhabhi does not have time to grieve, because they have to run, they have to escape from there. And they don't know why. Ultimately, somebody is left over there looking after. She's in a state of shock, you can imagine. And I said to her, so there was no time to grieve. She would be struck by my questions. Like, you're very perceptive, she say, because I said, you had no time to grieve. And she found that the most moving thing. Okay, nobody had really paid attention to the fact that she had no way in which she had to play this character who's standing upright and, never feeling any fear and whatever it is and so on. But the tragedy of your life is the tragedy of your life, and you can't give it up. So in a sense, how do you capture and is romantic love the only trope through which you can access revolutionary character and people around him? It seems to me that there are so many ways in which we can actually draw from our own historical experience and find, extremely moving things and extremely highly political messages that we will get for our time and for the way we want to actually also uncover the history of that buried story of the way in which we achieved independence and the way in which people gave up their lives in such a variety of ways. That's it.
Thank you. बहुत शुक्रिया. अगर फ्रांचेस्का हैं तो फ्रांचेस्का दिखने दी. हाँ, yes, that's what I am asking. वीरेंद्र यादव जी, आप हैं? अगर आप कुछ कहना चाहें. आनंद जी भी हैं जी, और संजीव यहाँ हैं. निखिल, हाँ. तो वीरेंद्र जी, अगर आप कुछ कह सकें. 5 मिनट हमारे पास है. वीरेंद्र जी, आप म्यूट हैं. आनंद अगर आप बोलें, और आनिया लुम्बा भी हैं, तो अगर.
मैं सिर्फ ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि यशपाल जी के 2-3 नए उपन्यासों का अनुवाद शीघ्र अंग्रेजी में आएगा. एक तो गीता का अनुवाद अभी मैंने ख़त्म किया है, वो आएगा. और दूसरी एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण पुस्तक, a very important anthology is coming out very soon, and that includes the writings of the former or members of the HSRA. Now, the interesting thing about those writings is that they were published in Viplav in 1939 and 1940. And these members, which includes Sukhdev Raj, Mahindra, not Sukhdev, and Veshampayan and other people, they had no access to those because they were in the files of Viplav. So when they wrote their memoirs or reminiscences later in 60s and 70s, they wrote things which were totally contrary to the things they had written in Viplav. So it will bring forth about the two versions of many incidents, and I hope people will be able to look at them. And the anthology is almost complete, and it should be published very soon by Raj Kamal. And I would invite you all to have a look at it, and we'll announce its publication. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anand.
I'll just jump in quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you to Kama and Simona for bringing together a book which I think has something to say about the relationship of history and literature. So I'll push back against a little bit of what Uma said, even though she was my history teacher in Miranda House many years ago. And many people think I should be more of a historian than a literary critic. But I think these histories, and particularly Yashpal, invites us to think about that relationship in a much more robust way than I think this sort of pitting history and literature, I think, is very unproductive when it comes to thinking about the writings of basically anybody, but particularly the revolutionaries. And I want to say that, firstly, I've just completed a translation of Yashpal's Manusha Ke Roop from Hindi to English. And that book isn't just, it's about the braiding of communist histories with rural histories, with the history of Bombay cinema. So I think that this volume, and thinking about Yashpal, is asking us to go through very capacious histories, not just the history of the revolutionary movement, because he kept writing, and he kept engaging with different periods of Indian history and different problems that it threw up. So for me, the wonderful experience of working with Kama and Simona and with other contributors was, firstly, that this was bringing together people who have written primarily in English, like myself, and people who are writing in Hindi critics. So I think that was very important. And then secondly, the thinking, the braiding of history and literature in a very robust manner. So I just have, this to say, and that impelled me to say, I used Manusha Ke Roop in an earlier book. I translated large parts of it. And I thought, no, I have to translate the whole book. And the last thing is, people have referred to his language. I think he's very hard to analyze, to translate in many ways, because there are so many idioms he's drawing upon, whether it is the Pahadi idiom, whether it is the Communist parties speak, whether it is Bombay cinema speak. So for me, he speaks many, many languages. And that revolutionary platform from which he started remains important for him, but then he expands that into a lot of spheres. So I don't have much to say, except that I'm really glad to be here. And I want to thank Simona and Kama once again for the extraordinary work on this volume. Thank you.
Thank you. So right. Thank you very much.
पूर्वा जी, मैं बोलूं क्या? वीरेंद्र यादव
जी, वीरेंद्र यादव जी बोलिए।
देखिए, आज बहुत महत्वपूर्ण चर्चा हो रही है, और मैं समझता हूं कि जैसा कि शुरू में अपूर्वा जी ने कहा कि हिंदी में यशपाल की चर्चा जितनी होनी चाहिए उतनी इन दिनों नहीं है। यशपाल का शताब्दी वर्ष 2003 में मनाया गया था। तब यशपाल के साहित्य को लेकर के कुछ चर्चाएं भी हुई, कुछ पत्रिकाएं भी प्रकाशित हुई, लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि आज के इस दौर में जब विभाजन को लेकर के नए ढंग से विचार किया जा रहा है, तब यशपाल के झूठा सच सरीखे उपन्यास को, जो कि विभाजन पर ही केंद्रित है और विभाजन पर नई दृष्टि से एक जिसे कहा जाए कि संवाद करता है और नए तरीके से उद्घाटित करता है, तो यशपाल के झूठा सच को कम से कम फिर से पढ़े जाने की और उसको लेकर के एक जो है संवाद की आवश्यकता है। मैं एक बात यहाँ याद दिलाऊं कि लगभग 2 दशक पूर्व हिंदी की एक पत्रिका कादम्बनी ने एक परिसंवाद आयोजित किया था, परिचर्चा, और उसमें पूछा था कि प्रेमचंद के बाद सबसे बड़ा लेखक कौन। तो उस परिचर्चा में जिन अधिकांश लोगों ने भाग लिया था, उनमें डॉक्टर नामवर सिंह, कमलेश और बहुत से लोग, मैं भी उसमें शामिल था, तो उसमें बड़ी संख्या ऐसी थी कि प्रेमचंद के बाद सबसे बड़े लेखक के रूप में लोगों ने यशपाल को माना था। तो बावजूद इसके कि यशपाल प्रेमचंद के बाद सबसे बड़े लेखक के रूप में माने गए, उन पर हिंदी साहित्य में और हिंदी समाज में जितनी चर्चाएं होनी चाहिए वो नहीं है। और आज की चर्चा, जो अभी तक की चर्चा है, मैं समझता हूँ कि उनके कथा साहित्य पर, कहानी या उपन्यास पर कम और उनके दूसरे पहलुओं पर ज़्यादा हुई है, और वो चर्चा भी बहुत ज़रूरी है। यशपाल का जो क्रांतिकारी पहलू है, जो दूसरी, तो बहुत से तथ्य यशपाल के क्रांतिकारी जीवन के हमारे सामने आ चुके हैं और उसके बारे में बहुत से तथ्य उद्घाटित भी हो गए हैं। तो मैं समझता हूँ उसको लेकर के कोई बहुत बड़ी बहस की संभावना अब निशेष हो रही है। और सेक्सुअलिटी का सवाल, साइकोलॉजी का सवाल, और जो फेमिनिज्म का सवाल है। ये इन सवालों को जरूर संबोधित किया जाना चाहिए यशपाल के साहित्य से। उसमें देखिए दोनों तरह की बातें मिलती हैं कि एक अंतर्विरोध भी उसमें शामिल है, और एक जो स्त्री पात्र हैं, स्त्री पात्रों को लेकर के एक उनको एक क्रांतिकारी चरित्र के रूप में, उनको एक जो है एक मुक्तकामी चरित्र के रूप में यशपाल ने काफी चित्रित किया है, और उसको लेकर के थोड़ी बहसें हुई हैं। तो मैं समझता हूं कि आज की ये जो संध्या है, जो बातचीत हो रही है, और ये पुस्तक जो प्रकाशित हुई है, मैं बहुत बधाई देना चाहूँगा सिमोना जी को और कामा जी को कि उन्होंने इस कार्य को संभव बनाया, और कम से कम अंग्रेजी के जानने वालों, अंग्रेजी के बौद्धिकों के बीच में इस किताब से एक नई चर्चा शुरू होगी, और इस चर्चा का जिसे कहा जाए प्रभाव हिंदी में भी होगा, और हिंदी में भी जो है यशपाल को लेकर के जो एक जिसे कहा जाए कि एक भाव इस तरह का है कि जैसे यशपाल पुराने पड़ गए, या एक वामपंथ का जो प्रभाव कम हुआ है, कम्युनिज्म का प्रभाव कम हुआ है, जो मार्क्सिज्म का प्रभाव कम हुआ है, उसे यशपाल को भी उतना महत्व नहीं दिया जा रहा है। लेकिन मैं समझता हूं कि आज के संदर्भ में और ऐतिहासिक संदर्भ में भी, और जो नई चाहे वो सबाल्टर्न दृष्टि हो, चाहे वो फेमिनिज्म की दृष्टि हो, उन सब से के लिए बहुत जरूरी है। और मैंने एक बात पहले भी इंगित की गई कि जैसे झूठा सच पर या मतलब विभाजन पर अंग्रेजी में बहुत कुछ लिखा गया है, लेकिन जो अंग्रेजी में लिखा गया है उसमें झूठा सच का बहुत समय तक जिक्र नहीं आया। यानी कि जो अंग्रेजी में इतिहास लेखन जिन्होंने किया है, उनमें कई लोगों ने दूसरे डिसिप्लिन, यानी अंग्रेजी में जो उपन्यास लिखे गए हैं, अन्य भारतीय भाषाओं में जो लिखे गए उनका तो जिक्र हुआ है, लेकिन झूठा सच का उल्लेख नहीं होता है। तो मैं समझता हूं कि झूठा सच को जो है एक बौद्धिक मुख्यधारा के विमर्श के रूप में शामिल होना चाहिए। और मैं धन्यवाद देते हुए अपनी बात समाप्त करता हूं।
बहुत शुक्रिया वीरेंद्र जी।
मैं एक बात जोड़ना चाहता हूँ इसमें वीरेंद्र जी की बात में।
जरूर।
वो ऐसा है कि कामा और सिमोना, द बुक बाय कामा एंड सिमोना इन इंग्लिश, वी आर शॉर्टली बी इन इंडिया एंड वी आर थिंकिंग ऑफ publishing it in Hindi, its translation in Hindi. So you might look forward to it also.
नहीं, बहुत अच्छी बात।
Thank you. Thank you. So I don't see Francesca there, so she has gone to pub to eat. ठीक है। संजीव, शिमोना कुछ सवाल थे, अगर आप उनको लेना चाहें अभी।
नहीं, संजीव, मृत्युंजय, आप
मृत्युंजय, हाँ
बाकी लोग
और अगर और कोई सवाल हैं, क्योंकि यशपाल आप में से कुछ लोगों ने पढ़ा होगा, अगर किताब ना पढ़ी हो तो, या यशपाल के बारे में पढ़ा होगा, तो आपके मन में अगर कोई सवाल है। नहीं, चलो ना, टेक दोस क्वेश्चंस।
हाँ, क्वेश्चंस तो काफी सारे थे। So I think I won't take them all if it's okay, Mohinder.
Questions are to be raised and not answered.
Okay, yes, so ठीक है, that's good.
Not answered.
I think I'll just say a couple of things. One is the question of you asked this ki is politics only a translation, that there's a distinction. You were talking about how I was thinking about a kind of failure in Yashpal's works. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. You see, what happens, and I think a lot of the essays trace this, is that what one sees in Yashpal's writing is a certain attempt to not only portray Nayi Dhang Ki Ladki, that's the title of a chapter, not only to portray this kind of different heroine, and I was also thinking about what Sanjeev writes at the very beginning of his essay. He says, you know, कि जब मैंने सब पहले पढ़ी ये किताब तो I was just scandalized कि ऐसे मतलब सिर्फ ऐसी हीरोइन ही नहीं है, लेकिन उसके बारे में नैरेटर जो है वो उसकी भी यही राय है कि ये तो आदर्श नारी के रूप में प्रस्तुत की जा रही है, जहाँ की हम एक्सपेक्ट ये करेंगे कि उसकी निंदा की जाए. तो हाँ, एक तो नए ढंग की लड़की है, लेकिन सबसे ज्यादा उससे ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण जो मुझे लगता है वो ये है कि in Yashpal's work what we see is on the one hand actually a very strong wish to wrestle with the question of sexuality. And here again I will also disagree a little bit with Uma, who has also been, though not formally my teacher, but really my teacher, as in I have learned so much from her work. Now this comes across not only in the novels but also in Simhavalokan. What I mean is that I tried to somehow address that a bit in the introduction, that even the question of revolution, even the question of violence, it can never be totally extricated from the erotic. No? Violence is eroticized. There is no doubt about it. You know, so, and I think he is constantly getting us to think, how is it that this party, in fact all these revolutionary groups, unka ye niyam hai कि you can't get married, you can't no women will be allowed, if you have a liaison with a woman that's a problem, keep sexuality out, and only then can you be a proper political actor. To be a dedicated political actor means not to give in to this weakness, and yet he's constantly trying to show that this weakness is already part of these revolutionary groups. You don't actually even need a flesh and blood woman to appear. I mean, I will tell you a very interesting, which I thought was a very interesting incident, Bhagat Singh ke baare mein, that he writes about in Simhavalokan, where he says, not only were there, so of course this question of envy, rivalry, it completely suffuses these groups. But it's not just about who's the bravest, who's the most courageous, who can perform the biggest action and so on. But he said it would come down to things like somebody saying, Bhagat Singh really admires beauty. He has an instinctive aesthetic sense, and that a member of the group saying, because I am not so good looking, he doesn't like me. Okay? I mean, he says this. He writes about this in Simhavalokan. कि उसको हमेशा ये जलन सी रहती थी कि भगत सिंह तो मेरे बारे में नहीं इतना सोचते क्योंकि मैं देखने में नहीं अच्छा. Now, this cannot be. I'm not saying that this is therefore homoerotic, blah blah blah. I'm saying we have to think differently. That the question of aesthetics, the question of some kind of desire, some kind of envy is always there. Usko nikala nahi ja sakta from these things. So, and I think that's one of the most interesting things that Yashpal's work does. And so that is why there's a way in which he's trying to think equality. He's reaching for equality. He's reaching for a kind of idea of political community which would surpass this envy. But it keeps getting pulled down, So I'm not reading that necessarily as a failure. People say, but still the women characters are a bit stereotypical, still this happens. And what I was trying to think about, I mean, I'm not, people can agree or disagree, or even I could change my mind, but while writing, what I was trying to think about is that it's okay for these contradictions to exist. One can want an ideal and not be able to actually perform it in the writing because, contrary to what might be believed, I mean, these aesthetic things are actually the hardest to change. You can have a rational idea, but जो आपकी proclivities हैं, जहाँ आप attached हैं, उसको बदलना सबसे ज़्यादा मुश्किल है. And that comes through in Yashpal's writing, and I think he's able to show that, like the Bhavaria character. Maybe Anya will want to talk about Bhavaria if she's still there, because she's also written about that. He's such an interesting character in that Gita book, Party Comrade. And even Yashpal's writing is so interesting, because Yashpal says something like कि वो I don't know, pashu manush tha, या something like आधा पशु था. Literally he says this, something like that. And then Gita is comparing him to the comrades, and she basically thinks कि ये लोग जो हैं ये बहुत सोचते हैं, इनको कोई आकर रास्ते में पीट जाए तो ये एक स्टेटमेंट दे देंगे उसके बारे में, But otherwise ये क्या मतलब दुबले पतले से हैं, ये कुछ नहीं कर सकते. But look at Bhavaria, who's like a thug, right? So वो तो अगर उसको सड़क में कोई मिल जाए तो वो तो 20 लोगों को पीटते. And then gradually, so it's this kind of masculinity which is almost animal-like, which has to be then recruited into the party. And then he is the one who actually becomes in that novel a very central figure in the revolutionary group and so on. So it's a kind of way of dealing with it. I mean, it's not enough to just say, well, then there's the stereotypical masculinity and the stereotypical femininity. But that Yashpal is trying to think, how does all of this work in politics, and what does politics become then? Even when he is very, very, obviously he's reading Marx, he's reading Engels, he's thinking about all these things. So I'll just say that.
अभी भी मौका है 5 मिनट. हाँ जी.
Vignesh.
I wanted to ask about, like the trope of romance. There is a trope that we sort of keep encountering and it proliferates. Is there also a trope of the revolution, revolutionary as an idea, that we may not think of as a risk as much as we think of the trope of romance because of the kind of valence that the figure of the revolutionary had? That was one of the questions I had. The other question I had was in relation to something you said in your final sort of response now. And you said you don't need a flesh and blood character of a woman for the erotic in the revolution. And then you talked about envy and beauty and aesthetics. But I wonder, what about the psychic investment in revolution itself? What of its erotic charge, and what do we make of that?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I was trying to get at, that the whole idea of the revolution, I mean, maybe Anand can even talk more about this, but it's already invested with a lot. So, for example, when Yashpal goes to plant a bomb under the train, that was the sort of the major event in his major kind of violent task that he undertook. He dresses in a certain way, then he takes a photograph. There's a whole kind of series of things that people do, and these are all they're already part of a narrative. Like, he's already seeing, how will I be represented? How will this be, seen, and so on. So, and there's the entire, I mean, which we don't have time to talk about, but there's the entire very important influence, but also immense romance of the Russian Revolution. I mean, the Russian Revolution, unparalleled significance. we can understand nothing of what was going on there. And it wasn't just Russian Revolution. You know, all the Russian novelists that they are reading, Turgenev, Dostoevsky, many. They are just, he translated this play, Vera or the Nihilists, written by Oscar Wilde. I mean, I don't think we even know today. People don't even know that Oscar Wilde wrote this play. But at that time, that was the play that everyone was reading because it was set in Russia. Oscar Wilde is writing a play about the assassination of a czar. And that's what, but we can talk more.
So, thank you, शुक्रिया एक बार फिर से सिमोना और कामा, आप दोनों को इस किताब को संपादित करने के लिए, और जिनके लेख इसमें हैं उन सबको जो यहाँ मौजूद हैं उन सबका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। आप सब लोगों का जो यहाँ आए, और सिमोना ने जैसा कहा कि इस 1 नवंबर की इस शाम को जब ज़्यादातर लोग घर में प्योरीफायर में बंद हैं, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।